All right, everyone, I think we're live, but I never quite know until I go over to my page and check and see what's happening. So I'm going to do that. And you can tell us if we're live. I'm sitting here with the Apostate Prophet. Now, I should start off with a quick question here. You call yourself the Apostate Prophet. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
So you call yourself the Apostate Prophet, and yet we know from Surah 33, verse 40 of the Quran, that Muhammad was the final prophet. And so I'm having some difficulty here understanding the logic of your name. If Muhammad's the last prophet, and here you are 14 centuries later, how can you be the Apostate Prophet?
Well, let me tell it this way. You call him the false prophet. I call him the pervert prophet, as I have done so before on my channel. I don't recognize him as a prophet. I am the rightful prophet. No. I call myself the Apostate Prophet because obviously I'm an apostate from Islam. I left the Islamic religion because it was logically impossible to believe in it for me. And then afterwards, especially because there were also morally very wrong things about Islam, I went out to talk about Islam. At first, I used the Prophet as some form of parody. I just said the Prophet. That was on Instagram about more than a year ago. But at some point, many angry people from the religion of peace invaded my Instagram account and continuously sent me death threats and insults and stuff like that. I even made a huge collection of those. And but at some point I thought I have to rename all of this because I'm tagged everywhere. So I thought Apostate Prophet sounds very nice.
Well,
and then later it
hang
became
on,
more
hang
and
on.
more sophisticated.
I'm having a hard time believing that people would threaten you simply for criticizing a religion that means peace. So maybe we'll talk about that in a bit. But along these same lines, I've noticed that you have a picture as your avatar. Now, who is this supposed to be? Is this a generic prophet, or is this Muhammad, or is this a you, or who? Hold up. Who is this right here? All right, I got up on the screen.
I can tell you that right away. What I did is... Wait, is it there already?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. What I did was I downloaded some software that I wanted to use to draw some awkward things. So I sat down there and just drew some very weird looking picture in 5 minutes or less than 5 minutes, and then I thought this looks actually very good. It wasn't supposed to be anyone. It was just some weird guy with some beard.
Okay.
I thought this looks very good, so I posted that. I don't know why people think that is Muhammad. I have no idea.
All right, so I'll remove that, but I will stick it down in the little corner just so people know how to recognize you when they see that avatar pop up somewhere. Now,
I completely approve of that.
but this does lead to a follow-up question. You know that according to Islam, images are forbidden, and that God doesn't like them. Angels won't go in a house that has an image. And if people see an image, they might just start worshiping it. So how does this not concern you that you're calling yourself the Apostate Prophet and you're putting an image out there that people might immediately start worshiping and bowing down to?
That's perfectly fine for me. That's perfect. I'm perfectly fine with that. I mean, if they want to do that, they can do that. I have no problem with that at all. I want to declare that here once and forever. I have no problem with that at all.
One more question here, and oh wait, let me respond to a couple people over here in the chat. People are posting where they're from, and people are asking how long this is going to be. Guys, this is I'm planning on doing this for about an hour, interviewing the Apostate Prophet here, and then depending on how many people are watching, we might answer some questions from the chat here. So, you know, if you guys are chatting with each other, raising points, that's fine. I probably won't pay attention to them for about an hour, and if we decide to continue for a little while, that would be a time to post some questions. But back to the Apostate Prophet here. One more question along these lines. You're saying that you are a former Muslim, and yet I detect a German accent. So we know that you criticize. We know that you criticize Islam, and we know that you have a German accent. How would we know that you are not a Nazi?
I didn't expect that. Okay.
Oh, wait. For some reason, your screen is frozen, but I hear your voice fine. So I don't know what that is. Maybe it'll go back to normal. But I guess it's fine as long we hear you fine.
Okay. Let me check that very quickly. I have some technical issues here.
Oh, yep, you're moving now. You hear me?
Am I there?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
There.
Okay.
All
Okay.
right, so
Amazing.
German accent.
Nazi.
German accent criticizing Islam. What conclusion are we supposed to draw here?
Well, the conclusion is, I'm not a Nazi. I mean, you can see it in my face.
Wait, you're not the master race here?
I am absolutely not. I wish I was. I wish I was, but sadly, life is unfair, and I'm not. I was born in Germany into a Turkish family, into a very religious Turkish family, into a Sunni Sufi Muslim family. And I grew up in Germany until I was 16 years old. I lived there. That's why I have a German accent that I still can't get rid of, and that I will probably never be able to get rid of. But yeah, so many people ask me for proof to prove that I'm an ex-Muslim. Of course, I won't do that.
Well, first we might want proof that I mean, we have to test your credibility in every way. We'll have to. Test whether you're German. Do you speak fluent German?
I do.
Okay, so tell me what I'm saying now. Ich habe einen grünen Pass.
I have a green card or green ID. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the beginning of a song called was that Fremden eigenem Land by a German hip hop group called Advanced Chemistry back in the day.
Okay. I don't know if that one.
Okay. All right. So, grew up in Germany. So, share for us a bit what it's like growing up, as far as your family background and your background through your time in Germany.
This is the point where we are stopping joking, right?
No, I assure you, I will joke throughout. I can't help myself. So joking will pop up again, but
okay,
yeah,
I'm fine with that.
We're getting more serious now, so I'll give a serious look.
That's fair. That's a fair point. Okay. I was born, as said, in Germany into a religious Muslim family, into a Sunni Sufi family. That's, of course, different from growing up into a fundamentalist Salafi Muslim family, for example, or growing up in Pakistan, for example. There's obviously a difference. But growing up in a religious Muslim family, it's very different. I mean, especially if you grow up in Germany, you see that you yourself, your own upbringing, your family is very much different from how people around you grew up and how people around you live. Of course, you are always told to respect all the things that Muslims tell you always to respect. You are told at a very early age to start observing the prayer, to start going with your parents to make specific Islamic practices, to fulfill them. For girls, it starts at a very early age to put on the hijab. That was not the case in my case, of course, but. Yeah, but that's about what that's about what it looks like. Of course, there's also these things like when you grow up in Germany, in the West, in a non-Muslim country, you can't eat a lot of things that other people eat. That's not only about pork; it's also about very many different things, like food that contains gelatin, any other type of meat that has not been slaughtered in the name of Allah, for example, is forbidden for you to eat if you are in a religious family that actually observes those rules. You can't go out with the other gender, for example. So it's quite depressive. It's very sad actually to grow up in that. And something is bothering me here. But yeah. That's about what it looks like. It's quite depressing, quite sad. That's how I can summarize that.
Okay, so that's sort of the Islamic impact. But if you were a Muslim, if you were a Muslim from a Muslim family to some extent in Germany, how were you treated by non-Muslims? Did they?
Oh, that was the question. Well, no, actually not. I mean, I want to make that very clear. I want to make that very clear because that's something that's really bothering me. It's good that you brought that up. I see very many Muslims in the West, in America, in Germany, in Sweden, in France, and wherever, say things like that they are treated with racism and that they are treated unfairly and that many people have suspicions about them and prejudice against them and so on. I grew up in Germany too, and I didn't even grow up in a very specifically tolerant region or anything like that. It was just a rural region in Germany in the south. You know, in the south is more religious is more conservative than the north in Germany. And I didn't experience racism or anything like that in any form. I can even go as far as to tell you that I had friends who were very much on the far right when I was growing up, and among them were also adults, and I was a teenager. And even among them, I didn't experience racism, let alone among the general population. I didn't experience racism in any way at all. I experienced much more racism among my own kind in Germany.
Now, what
I know
mean,
some.
what do you mean according to among your own kind? Like because you're a different kind of Muslim or
No. No.
towards the non-Muslims or what?
Yeah, I'm generalizing the Muslim population here, or Turks or Muslims, for example. Many people are a bit angry when you say it this way, but that's just the truth. That's what I have seen. That's what many other people have seen. By my own kind, I'm referring to Turks and Muslims, for example. And I mean, I have seen among them continuously this hate against non-Muslims. I had teachers at school who were very kind to me, kinder than any teacher that I have met in Turkey, for example, because we moved to Turkey after a while when I was 16. And but in the back of my mind, while we were having German teachers and German friends, we were always told in Muslim families that no matter how friendly they are to us, no matter how nice they are to us, we should always think about the fact that they are Christians, and that they eat pork, and that they are basically what they eat. But that's nothing new, nothing surprising, nothing controversial among the Muslim population in such countries. That's something that's regularly said among Muslims.
Hold on, because we hear that non-Muslims are overly critical of Muslims and have this negative view of Muslims simply because their beliefs and their eating practices. But you're saying that many people in the Muslim community were doing the exact reverse, that they had a negative view of non-Muslims based on things like, you know, what they believe and what they eat?
I wouldn't say the exact reverse. I would say they are actually doing it. Mm-hmm. And they are doing it in a much worse way than they are actually describing other people to do that. You can see among many Muslim sources, even online, if you go on such a search on why pork is forbidden, on why pork is bad, for example, that they say people who eat pork also act like the thing that they eat.
I've seen Zakir Naik say that. Yeah.
Yeah. For example, exactly. I have seen that too. And I have heard that when I was 6 years old. I have heard that when I was 7 and 8 and 9, growing up in Germany among people who regularly eat pork, for example. You know, I was that was constantly beaten into my mind by my own kind that those people who eat pork are like pigs. Mm-hmm. Because when they eat that, they are also acting like that. And that was also the excuse why they have very weird behavior among themselves. Like, I don't know, all the things that you can now mention that I mean, the way they describe non-Muslims. Mm-hmm. What I want to say at this point is also, I said Christians specifically, although I grew up in Germany, and in Germany there is a huge population of non-religious people. In the Muslim community, that's not even something that's respected. I mean, many non-religious people in the West are telling us nowadays that we have to be tolerant towards the Muslim population, towards Islam, and so on. But when I grew up in that Muslim community, in my Muslim community and also in other Muslim communities, the existence of non-religious people and atheists, for example, is not even respected. The general Muslim population doesn't even have respect for the existence of atheists and agnostics and irreligious people. They usually describe those people as Christians and crusaders in very defaming ways. Yeah.
All right. Well, you eventually became a very bad Muslim by leaving Islam. But why don't you give us
Yeah.
a little background about sort of, people go through kind of this sort of situation in their lives. How basically how devout were you at various stages and starting here kind of in Germany?
Well, I would say like this. I grew up into a religious Muslim family, but in my childhood, in my teenage years, I wasn't very receptive to my parents teaching me about the religion and trying to make me pray and things like that. I was always rebellious against it. I always had kind of an independent mind. So I was never really into that. But we moved to Turkey when I was 16 years old. I went through major depression when I was in Turkey. I found myself identifying with things like communism. I was very, for quite a long time in my late.
How big is that in Turkey, by the way? Is that like a significant, like, is that a live option for lots of Turks, or is that, if
Regionally.
if someone told me here they were a communist, I would think it's really weird. Is that somewhat normal there?
Well, I think it's more common among the general population, but people don't view that in a good way. I mean, people speak very, very bad about communists,
Yeah.
and in very generalized. Yeah, yeah. So for some time I was a communist, and I really went very far because I had major issues, major depressions with going back to Turkey and so on. And I found myself openly supporting, even at school, this illegal city, how is it called? Illegal guerrilla organizations, illegal terrorist communist organization, revolutionary organization. But I thought more and more about communism and about how much it really makes sense. And I came to the conclusion that it doesn't make sense at all. And it's a big human failure to rely on philosophies like Marxism. So I was at some point in 2010, at the very beginning of 2010, I suddenly found myself, when my aunt died, whom I liked very much, who was like a friend to me, I found myself suddenly thinking more about death and about the meaning of life. And I turned more and more towards becoming religious, towards reading the Quran and other scripture. And suddenly, in the middle of 2010, I became extremely religious and devoted myself very, very much to being religious. I stopped listening to music because that's forbidden. I stopped doing all the bad things. I stopped even things that are not so bad, but that I shouldn't be doing anyway. And I started praying all the time, not only 5 times a day, but also at night and in the morning, reading the Quran. I read the Quran 3 times during my religious times. I read Sahih Bukhari very much during that time, and also many other texts from especially from Sufi scholars, like Imam Ghazali, for example. And I even used to go out and tell people about how beautiful this is and how they should do this too, how they should join my religiousness and try Sufi practices and stuff like that. So I was really dead serious about that. But it lasted about 4 years. And at the end of 2013, at the beginnings of 2014, I had more and more questions, and I questioned things more and more. I came to question all the things that were in my mind that I pushed away because I didn't want to question those things, because I was afraid of losing my religiosity, because we were always told at age 5 that this is the absolute truth and questioning it is forbidden. And if we start questioning it, then Satan will play with us and will lead us astray. And Muhammad said explicitly that you shouldn't question it and should rather pray to Allah when questions come into your mind, because those questions are put into your mind by Satan himself and stuff like that. But I just couldn't deal with it. I had so many questions in my mind, and all those questions led me to leave this religion. Especially towards the end, I came to this to something that we Muslims are told all the time, that the gospel and the Torah, that the Bible is corrupted. it, and that we should abstain from it, that we shouldn't even read it and give it any attention, because the Jews and the Christians corrupted it because they wanted to go astray and they didn't want to obey Allah. But at the end of my time, after reading the Quran for so long and studying Islam for so long, I started actually opening the Bible and reading the Gospel, reading the Torah, and then I noticed that it doesn't make sense. I looked at all those Quran references on how the Gospel and the Torah were actually right at that time when the Quran was revealed, and then I noticed that we have examples of the Bible from that time, and it all just didn't add up. And when I saw all those contradictions between the Quran and the Bible, when I saw how the Bible sounds compared to how the Quran sounds, the Quran in the beginning of the Quran, it even begins right away bashing non-Muslims, bashing all those who don't believe in it, telling them that they will go to hell, that they are deaf, dumb, and blind. Comparing that to the Bible, where it talks about so many stories, about so many inspirations and stuff like that, I saw that there is something not right about that. And going further about that, I wanted
to ask about that. Some people are saying my volume is too low. Let me try and adjust this real quick, because some people are saying it's fine, and other people are saying it's too low. Let me turn mine up a little. Check, one, check. All right, that's about as good as I can get without going into the controls, which I don't want to do during a live stream. So I'll try and talk a little bit louder here. But now, what you said is interesting about what we call the Islamic dilemma, namely that you saw it as a problem that the Quran affirms scriptures, but if you go to those scriptures, you see that they don't line up with Islam, but they're supposed to. And so historically, Muslims who realized this, Muslims who recognized this, historically, if you're a Muslim in a Muslim land and you know that the Quran is affirming the scriptures of the Jews and Christians, and you go to these and you find out that the scriptures of the Jews and Christians don't line up with Islam, it makes sense to say, hey, maybe the Quran is wrong here. But in a Muslim land, you're not exactly free to say that there's a problem here. And so what actually happened in Muslim lands where people didn't want to get their heads chopped off was to say that the scriptures have been corrupted. But you don't get that impression from the Quran. You get that from recognizing that the Torah and the Gospel don't line up with what the Quran says. And so you have to just say, well, it's been corrupted. So notice, this would be like me saying, hey, if you want to know if I'm a prophet, go down to the river over there, and you're going to see a big sign, and that sign is going to say, David Wood is a prophet. And you go down to that sign, and that sign says, David Wood is not a prophet. Don't believe him. He's a liar. And you say, David, you told me the sign is going to say that you're a prophet, but it says you're a false prophet. And I say, the sign must have been corrupted. Well, that's not what I said. I said, you're going to go down there and the sign's going to say that I'm a prophet. Likewise, the Quran says, you go to the Torah, you go to the Gospel, you find out that Islam is true, you find out that Muhammad's a prophet, the scriptures are inspired and preserved and authoritative, and so you have to believe in these scriptures. Christians and Jews have to obey these scriptures. But you actually go to them, and you would find out if you go with the Torah of the Gospel, Muhammad turns out to be a false prophet. And so the conclusion should be, hey, there's a problem here. But the conclusion among many Muslims is, they must have been corrupted. That's not what it said. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because there's always a question of whether certain arguments can actually have an impact on a Muslim. And I know a Muslim, Abdul Murray, who's a former Shia Muslim, who started studying the Bible specifically because he noticed that the Quran over and over again was telling him to go to the Bible. But you're here saying you were able to recognize this as a problem for Islam.
Absolutely. Well, there are some examples I can give for that I had at the very beginning. I always tell Muslims, and I would suggest every Muslim to go and pick up those books, to pick up the New Testament and the Old Testament, for example, and start reading that, and to see that there is something wrong about all of the story that the Quran tells you. For example, I thought there is so much inconsistency about Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac, for example. You know, the Quran tells the whole story about Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac in a very different way, while in the Bible, where the whole story originated, it talks about Isaac, for example, being brought on the altar for the test. In the Quran or in Islam, it is suddenly Ishmael. Why? And how did the Jews and the Christians come together and seriously manage to change that whole thing and make everyone accept that? How did that happen? I'm sorry, I can't believe that. Other things like the Kaaba, for example. When you ask why the Kaaba is not mentioned in the Bible, since the Kaaba is such an important thing to Allah, that it is the most important place on earth, then if Allah is the same God who also revealed the Bible, the older books, then the Kaaba must have been also mentioned in the Bible, right? But when you ask Islamic scholars about that, when you ask your local Islamic teacher about that, they will either make misrepresentations of the Bible and say it is actually mentioned here and there, or they will just tell you, well, you shouldn't even think about that because those books have been corrupted. But seriously, I mean, so many people believed in those books, so many people followed those religions, and somehow those people all could come together and completely erase the memory of the Kaaba from all the minds of Christians and Jews. That's impossible. It doesn't even make sense. I mean, there is that one point, there is that Islamic dilemma point. There is also the other point that so many things that must have been mentioned in those books are just not mentioned, and that's just illogical. It doesn't make any sense.
So, obviously, some things started bothering you about Islam. Are there any other things that started to cause problems here?
Well, yeah. Those inconsistencies were the problems. Well, so many other things were problems. I mean, I thought about many scientific issues in the Quran, for example, many scientific errors in the Quran that just didn't add up. About how the sun is moving, about how the sun is moving around the earth and following the moon. And I don't know, so many other things, many ethical issues, many moral issues that were just unacceptable for me because I didn't grow up in a Muslim world. I grew up in Germany, and I really liked the way people think about humanity and about morals and about respecting each other, about respecting women, for example. And then I'm going into the Islamic scripture, and the Islamic scripture tells me that women are less intelligent, that women are stupid, that women have lesser rights, that men can beat their wives, and so many other things, that you can kill people based on so many things, like apostatizing from the religion. Even at the end, when I was thinking about the possibility of leaving Islam, and I learned more and more about how Islam deals with apostasy, I thought that's the worst thing. I really shouldn't be doing that. But I didn't really think that. I mean, that was the first thought, but that even provoked me even more to question the religion and to go towards apostasy, because I could not believe that Almighty Allah, who gives me this religious scripture and who wants me to believe in it, also tells other Muslims in the world to kill me if I leave this religion. It just didn't make sense to me that Allah, who presents himself as the merciful and the almighty and this and that, would order regular other people to kill you for leaving the faith. You know, that's the moral side of the story, for example. I just couldn't come to accept such things. But aside from that, there are also many other logical issues. I mean, I talked about those so often. I'm still talking about these things, you know.
So you have a couple different things going on here. One, you have sort of an internal incoherence, namely that the Quran is affirming scriptures that fundamentally contradict the Quran, and so the Quran would just be incoherent on this point. And then factual errors, and then some moral issues. So they didn't tell you in Germany that the sun sets in a muddy pool?
No, they didn't.
I have
no idea.
What kind of school did you go to?
No one told me about it. My whole life is a lie.
Okay, so and by the way, so if you're noticing things that you have a problem with, so the Quran's description of the universe, or the Quran's the Quran's comments about women and unbelievers, and Muhammad's claims to kill apostates, things like that. Because if you're going through Bukhari, you're gonna see a bunch of stuff in addition to the Quran. Did you go out and try to seek Islamic responses to these things and say, okay, I need to try and reconcile these things, and maybe get some peace of mind that way?
I did, especially what you mentioned right now is actually something very relevant to this. The sun sinking in a muddy spring. I was stuck on that the first time. I was stuck on that the second time when I read the Quran, and the second time I thought, I really can't do anything with this information, but I should also not question this, because questioning this is horrible. I shouldn't be doing that. But I just couldn't resist, and I went online to see all the discussions about it, to see all the things about it that Islamic apologists, for example, say to make sense of that Quran verse. And they say, for example, the Quran verse says that Dhul Qarnayn went to one side of the earth and he saw the sun setting in a muddy spring. Reading that, it makes no sense, which is, by the way, ironic, because many Muslims tell you to just read the Quran and you will believe in Islam. But online, you see that people are trying to tell you that, what the Quran meant is that actually Dhul Qarnayn saw it that way. It was actually from his perspective, but the Quran doesn't say that. The Quran clearly says that he found it that way.
And in addition, for Muslims who believe that Muhammad is, according to Islam, the greatest interpreter of the Quran, Muhammad said in a Sahih Hadith in Sunan Abu Dawud, where he was with one of his companions, and he asked one of his companions if he knows where the sun goes when it sets. His companion said, "No, you're the prophet. You're the one who knows." And Muhammad said, "It goes to set in a pool." So and notice there's not one word about Dhul Qarnayn in this story. So you can't say this is just the way it's appearing to Dhul Qarnayn. He reached some body of water or something like that. This is Muhammad explaining where the sun goes. So a Muslim who says what the Quran really means there is something else is basically saying he understands the Quran better than Muhammad did.
Yeah. Well, at that point, I saw that there are some controversies about that hadith that don't actually make sense, because there are many other hadith that have the same authenticity level as that hadith that are somehow accepted as completely authentic by the same Islamic apologists who view that hadith as problematic. But I thought, okay, that's even more messed up. But then I went on, I thought, even if I accepted that hadith is in some way problematic, which it is not, and I want to say here, it's not problematic at all. Even if I accepted that hadith is problematic, there are other hadith that reference the same thing without that ending, without Muhammad saying that it lands in a pool. But the wording of those hadith also include that the sun goes somewhere at night. And there is also another hadith which you surely know, where Muhammad says that the sun goes to prostrate in front of Allah. Before the throne of Allah. And I thought, seriously? The sun doesn't go anywhere. The sun, from its own perspective, doesn't go anywhere. The sun is there. It doesn't go anywhere at night. If it's night here, it's day over there. I mean, that's basic knowledge nowadays. Did Muhammad not know that? Of course, I didn't think to myself, did Muhammad not know that back then? But that's what my mind wanted to think. But I was constantly suppressing those things.
Now,
but
along those lines, did you notice that you had to suppress certain thoughts in that way that you wouldn't necessarily have had to suppress as far as German culture, because you're kind of a dual culture person? Have you noticed that was a much stronger psychological factor given your Islamic culture than it was German culture?
Of course, yeah. I mean, you mean to understand this correctly, you mean if
like you have
the
to,
Islamic
you have to block certain strands of thought. Because,
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I grew up in Germany. I grew up going to school and teachers telling us to question everything, to think about everything, to use our mind always. That's the general German culture. You know, that you should always pursue knowledge, that you should always challenge your ideas, and this and that. That's what I learned in Germany, in the German culture. When I went to Turkey, I saw that people don't think that way at all. And Turkey is just the beginning of Islamic culture, of the Islamic world. If you go deeper into Islamic culture, to Iraq, for example, where I have been twice as well, it's much, much worse. But Turkey is only the beginning. And Islamic culture, if you stop thinking about Turkish culture and focusing on Islamic culture, since I was so religious back then at that stage, it's even worse. I mean, in Islamic culture, you are told, you are even in an hadith. I'm sure you know about the hadith. Someone comes to Muhammad and asks a question. Muhammad says to him, Satan comes to you and says, who created this, who created that, until he comes and asks, and makes you ask who created Allah. If he comes to you, I don't remember the exact wording, but seek refuge in Allah, you know, something like that. Stop wasting your time with such idle thoughts and seek refuge in Allah. That's the main mentality, and that's a very well-known hadith in the Islamic world. You are always taught that what your religious authority, what those people are telling you, what the Quran tells you, is the exact absolute truth. What is beyond that, all the knowledge that you get beyond that, is in no way a contradiction to that. Even if it is a contradiction, it is actually not a contradiction. If you come to the conclusion that it is a contradiction, then it's you who is faulty, not the Quran, not the Islamic authority. It's you who is faulty. That's always the mentality that is presented to you in the Islamic world, in Islam. And that's how you are always taught to suppress your own ideas. Yeah. Well, what I wanted to add to leaving Islam, to one of those strong points of leaving Islam, is that I had this one atheist friend in Turkey, very surprisingly, because people identifying themselves openly as atheists in Turkey or in other countries is usually not very well received by the general population, to say the least.
So this was an open atheist, not a secret atheist.
No, he was an open atheist. And he was getting in a lot of trouble because he was an atheist. Mm-hmm. And I actually approached him saying, you know, I wanted to challenge him about his atheism, about his critical views on Islam. And I wanted to challenge him. And I sat down with him. I said, I can discuss with you, and you will be wrong in the end. And he said, you shouldn't really challenge me. You shouldn't do that. You will be sad in the end. You know, he was challenging me too in response. And I thought that's not possible. I'm very firm in my belief, and my belief is completely right. Then he came to me and said, when you read the Quran, did you notice something about Muhammad's personal life? Then he said, he reminded me of a Quran verse. I can't really remember numbers very well. I have a problem with numbers, but you know what I'm talking about. It's your favorite Quran verse. He said, in this Quran verse, Allah speaks to the Muslims and says, don't enter Muhammad's house if you're not invited, and don't sit there too long once you are done eating. Please, not please, disperse immediately after you are